As a matter of precaution, Isabelle walked with both hands holding the revolver around her midriff. The security arch did not protest as she glided through it, and she followed the corridor for another 100 feet until it opened into the departure lounge. It was at that point she stopped. She didn't have a choice because the glass security barrier was still down. Placing her palm on the cool surface, she pushed to see if the glass would bow, but it was like touching a smooth, transparent stone wall. She looked beyond the barrier at the vast departure lounge. With its shops and restaurants, it had the look of a small shopping mall, and there were thoughts of looting running through her mind as her eyes gazed from left to right. But then she paused. Something had caught her eye. Isabelle walked as far right as she could and stared hard through the thick glass. She wiped the visor of her headgear and raised her eyebrows because what was on the other side of the security barrier was something she was not expecting. Isabelle placed the revolver inside her jacket. From her side pocket she took out the radio, switched it on, and waited a few seconds for the green light to become fully illuminated. She raised it to her visor, pressed the button on the side, but hesitated momentarily to see if she could think of something witty to say. Unfortunately, she couldn't, but there was a slight smirk on her face when she eventually said, "Hey, good looking. What have you got cooking?" A man on the other side of the glass sat on the floor. His back leaned against an advertising board, and a radio communicator similar to the one Isabelle was holding was sat in his lap. He looked scruffy, dirty, malnourished, and the beginnings of a beard indicated he had not shaved for a couple of weeks at least. His clothes were ragged and creased, but they did not look out of place covering the unkempt man. She released the button on the radio and watched the man begin to stir from his slumber. Isabelle watched his head slowly rise as if being awoken from a long, deep sleep. He tried to focus his eyes, still unsure as to what he had just heard. Isabelle pressed the button again to prompt him to look her way. "This is like Alice through the looking glass, except my name's not Alice. I'm guessing neither is yours." She paused, almost amused at the man's confusion. "My name's Isabelle." The man's head looked left and then right, but not directly towards her. His puzzled expression suggested that her voice was the last thing he was expecting to hear. She pressed the button again. "Over here! Not that thin! Can't miss me. A little more to the right." The man's head turned. "That's it. Just a little more, pretty boy." The eyes squinted as the man tried to focus. He rubbed them and then wiped his face. "Can you talk?" asked Isabelle, indicating the radio in her hand. "Just press the button on the side." The man stared at her, a perplexing stare that furrowed his eyebrows and forehead. He started to move, but it was obvious he was weak. From his seated position, he began to crawl on all fours towards the glass, all the time his eyes fixed on Isabelle. He reached the glass wall and sat upright, his left shoulder leaning against it. He placed his right palm against the glass and looked at the inspector. Isabelle knelt down and placed her hand on the glass opposite his. She watched tears roll out of each of the man's eyes and down his grimy cheeks, before he eventually lifted the radio to his mouth and pressed the button. His voice was breathless, feeble, and almost without tone.
"We can't cook anything in here. We're living on a diet of crisps and sweets. If I was 10 years old, I'd be enjoying myself. So, to answer your question, I've not got anything cooking."
Isabelle smirked and replied, "What's your name?"
"Inch."
"Inch? What sort of name is that? Was it a choice between that, foot or yard? Were your parents afraid of the metric system?"
"Who are you?"
"My name's Inspector Isabelle Cannon."
"Are you here to rescue us?"
"Of course."
"And Hensley spoke to you, alerted the authorities?"
"Who's Hensley?"
"One of the security guards. He managed to get out. He said he'd fetch help. I have to say, Inspector, I was expecting something a little more government official, rather than someone in an ill-fitting biosuit with a tweed blazer over the top."
"Don't knock the look, Mr. Inch. It's It's what's being worn on the street these days. Inch dropped his arm to his side, but Isabelle kept her palm pressed against the glass.
You're not the government or the army, are you?
Said Inch, dejectedly. No, I'm not. I'm just someone trying to survive.
And those things, those hideous things,
they're everywhere. They've not left us much. There was a pause in the conversation, and Isabelle looked at the dishevelled man. He was indeed good-looking. If you could look beyond his unclean face and ringed eyes, there was a man who could scrub up well. Very well. His eyes were a golden brown, and the rest of his features, his nose and mouth, were quite striking. You said we can't cook anything in here, continued Isabelle. Are there more of you?
Yes. 24. No. Sorry, it's 23 now, not including myself.
And where are they?
Further into the lounge area.
There was a fizz of static from the radio, and Tabitha's voice came through the speaker.
Inspector, you've wandered off again. Where are you?
It was obvious that Inch could hear Tabitha's voice through his radio as well. Isabelle pressed the button once more. Come to the departure lounge. I've found some survivors.